We're pretty much at the limit of borrowing at the moment.
You are supposed to be the servants of the people. The people are supposed to be your bosses. And to me, the people doesn't even realize that.
Good evening. My name is Ralph from St. Vincent and the Grenadines.
I'm going to say something that's controversial. CARICOM has gotten in its own way.
I want to be very clear that there is a dangerous tendency in our countries.
This program is talk about the facts. We must bring the facts.
Time to face the facts.
Hello everyone, and welcome to this edition of Time to Face the Facts, where we discuss issues that affect us in our Caribbean and look how we can solve some of these problems. This edition will deal with one of the most taboo issues in the region, and that is violence within the home, intimate partner violence, violence against children, sexual abuse, physical abuse, all the types of abuses that happen behind closed doors. And I have quite an eminent panel to discuss that issue this evening. So you don't go anywhere, you stay with us. We'll be right back where you get to meet the panelists and join us in the discussion.
Feel good facts.
Avoid the most common causes of spreading the flu. Cover your coughs and sneezes with a tissue, dispose of it straight away, and either wash your hands or use an alcohol-based hand sanitizer.
Welcome back, viewers. Happy that you can join us on this edition of Time to Face the Facts. I'm your host, Beverly Sinclair, and I have with me, as I said before we went on the break, quite an eminent panel to look at the issue of violence in the home, what it's looking like, and what can we really do about it, although we know a lot has already been done. I'm going to ask the panelists to introduce themselves, tell you a little bit about who they are and the work they do, and why you should listen to them on this topic. And I will start with our friends in Guyana. I think, Odessa, I'll ask you to go first, introduce yourself, and let's get to meet you.
Hello, everybody. Good day. Hope everybody's doing well. My name is Odessa Primus, and I am from Guyana, Bartica in particular. And I am an artiste. I'm a stand-up comedian, playwright, actress. And of course, I have for several years been involved in advocacy work and humanitarian work and that sort of thing. But primarily, my focus has been on the arts because I do believe that the arts can be used as a medium, not only for entertainment, but also for education. And it's very important, especially as an artist, to ensure that in whatever we do, a message is sent. It must not be something that is purely for entertainment. People must go home with something new. So that, of course, is me in a nutshell, trying to educate through the arts.
Thank you, Odessa. And our other guest from Guyana is Vanda. Vanda, tell us about who you are.
Hello everybody. Sorry I'm not live like you, but we have some severe internet stability problems where I am at home in Guyana. So thank you very much, Ms. Beverly, for inviting me. It's wonderful to see you, Odessa, from Guyana. Wonderful, and I agree completely that the arts are so important for spreading the word. So who is Vanda? I am Vanda Radzik. I'm a long-standing advocate and activist for women's rights, gender equality, indigenous people's rights, social justice and environmental justice. I am currently a commissioner with the Constitutional Rights Commission in Guyana on women and gender equality. And we were enacted after we had constitutional reform and some amendments in 2003. That is my where I'm situated currently, but I'm also a founder of Red Thread, which is a well-known Guyanese women's rights-based organization. And I'm involved in a lot of things. The two threads in my life have been the environment, and now especially with climate action, and with women's rights, social justice, and gender equality. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vanda. And we move up the line. We are going to make a stop in Grenada. And in Grenada, we have Tyrone. Tyrone, tell us a little bit about what you do and why we should listen to you on this topic of violence in the home.
Good evening. Thank you very much, Beverly, and hello to my fellow panelists for this conversation. Tyrone Buckmeyer. I am currently the Director of Legal Aid and Counseling Clinic in Grenada, which is the lead civil society organization that lends itself to work, advocacy, and action around issues of violence, gender-based violence, intimate partner violence, and so forth. Our agency has been in existence for 32 years. I have been myself in the social work fraternity for now 33 years. And a lot of my work has been around working with both victims and perpetrators of gender-based violence and other forms of violence as a means to creating the environment and encouraging people to, to have or to participate, exist in non-violent relationships that are built on the premise of equality and justice. So Legal Aid and Counseling Clinic has a number of programs that we run, which hopefully I may get an opportunity to speak more about later on.
Certainly. Thank you, Tyrone. And we're still in Grenada, where we have a legal mind, someone who has been in the courts with a lot of these issues.
Well, thanks for having me, Sister Bev. My name is Anselm Clouden, a criminal defense attorney and a human rights practitioner. I've been, as Sister Bev has indicated, I've been an advocate on multiplicity of human rights issues, including the abolition of the death penalty in those days. So that I'm well seasoned, I think, in human rights and domestic violence, what have you. I face it every day in the court. But I must say that here in Grenada, we have made tremendous strides. There's now a bill before the parliament. It's going to be a national sex defenders registry.
All right.
2020.
And Slim, we'll get to the bill a little later. We just have our other guest introduce herself. And tell,
that's about all I want to say.
And then we'll get to those details a little further in the conversation. So we're moving up the Caribbean. We started in Guyana, we stopped in Grenada, and now we're going to stop in Jamaica and meet our guest from Jamaica.
Good day to everybody. Thank you very much, Beverly, for inviting me to be on this program. To introduce myself, my full title is Ambassador Alun Downbey Asamba. Although I have had many roles. I was a senator, as a member of parliament, a minister of government, high commissioner to the UK, and ambassador to a number of European countries. I'm very involved in the credit union movement, and I remember I'm also involved in the Lions movement, and I remember Red Thread from going to a meeting in Guyana where I met persons from Red Thread who were around at the time. So I've told you what I have been. I'm an attorney at law, and this year it will be 40 years since I became an attorney at law, and I know I don't look like I should be. But I am here on this program because I have had experience with family violence. I am a recovered, is that the word you use? I have suffered intimate partner violence, and I'm not going to make a big speech about it now, but Beverly, when you started, you said this was a taboo subject, and I was probably the first person in my kind of circle, if you want to say that, who ever spoke publicly about this. And I can tell you a little bit more about that experience as we go along. But I'm here. I do work with NGOs who are involved in all the things that you are involved in, all of my colleagues who are here. But in addition to that, I have suffered from being beaten by my husband. Let me just say it very clear and start from the beginning. I have suffered from being beaten by my husband. And there are people who look at me. If you look at me, I'm 5'9" and going on 10. And there are lots of people who say, how you so big and man can beat you. Well, we can talk about that as the program goes on.
Absolutely, we will talk about that because, and it is interesting that you say, you know, people within your circles, having been a senator, an ambassador, a member of parliament, society does have these different tiers, whether we like it or not, they are there. And a lot of times we associate violence in the homes with people from a different tier and we expect it there. But when it gets to a higher, when you move into the 1%ers and the 10%ers, we behave as if there isn't any violence in the homes in that circle within society. And I am sure, Alun, you would say that we would be surprised to know what goes on behind some of those ornate oak doors. And those...
You would be surprised. You would be very surprised.
Yes, but you know, we come out, we wash off the bruises and put on some nice makeup and we come out and smile at society and pretend as if everything is okay. Because social standing and the way we look to the public means more than dealing with this issue of gender-based violence. And I'm gonna just invite my panelists. You can jump in if you hear something that you want to comment on or that you want to tag onto. Please feel free to unmute your mic and say, you know, I would like to say something on that issue because it's a broad subject and we're not gonna be playing 20 questions. We want to have a conversation. So we want to hear from all of you, your experiences. Odessa has worked with a lot of women who have been through the experience, and so has Vanda. Anselm has seen them in court, and Tyrone within that system, that public service system. You know, I am sure he has seen so many broken people. I have personally never ever talked to someone who is not emotional about having gone through the experience. Sometimes they break down and they still cry years later, 20 years later, 30 years later. It's like the experience stays. So maybe Vanda can tell us a little bit about what her organization does and how you communicate with people who have faced this kind of experience of violence in the home.
Okay, thanks, Beverly. What I'd like to begin with, however, is some facts on this in Guyana. So, for instance, in 2019, there was a prevalence study done by the UN called the Health and Life Expectancy Survey. And in that survey, 55% of Guyanese surveyed said that they had experienced some form of intimate party violence. And the outcome of that is that in Guyana, 1 out of every 2 women in our country has experienced some form of violence. And this prevalence study was specifically on intimate party violence. Interestingly, it is the young who are most at risk, that the age group of 15 to 24 years of age have the highest risk of experiencing violence. And added to all of those statistics, 50% of all Guyanese interviewed, or 50% of the survey has never reported an act of violence, although they have experienced it. So I just wanted to kind of set the tone in that. We have increasing femicides that is a Latino word. We should begin to use it here, which is women murdered within the domestic situation. And it's rising in Guyana, and I think everywhere else in the Caribbean. We seem to have a culture of violence. A little later, Beverly, I'll speak about men and their impacts, and also the way they're affected, and some interesting developments in Guyana with spaces for men. But I'll stop there for now and come back with some more figures later. Just to say, my organization, we're a commission. We report only to Parliament. We're supposed to be independent. Every year, we report to Parliament. We do a substantial report. We make summary of recommendations, because the Parliament are the legislators and they're supposed to be upholding our laws. And we like the fact that it's, you're reporting to the government and the opposition. So it hopefully has a bipartisan thing. However, none of our recommendations year after year after year have ever had any uptake in Parliament, although speakers, successive governments and speakers have said that it should be laid for the attention of Parliament. We also have one of the highest number of women in the world, actually, in Parliament, and yet. Thank you.
Tyrone, the legal service, which is based on how you have described it, it's really offered free to assist some people. Is that so?
Yes, it is. I just want to piggyback a little bit on something that Vanya said in terms of the web survey, because that survey Grenada was one of the countries that the survey was done in. And what it shows in our situation is that 1 in 4 women, 25%, have experienced some form of either intimate partner violence, non-intimate partner violence, which is violence within the family. So the average we have across the region, it goes as high as 1 in 2 in Guyana, 1 in 3 in some countries, 1 in 4. But what it says is overall, the Caribbean region really has a problem with violence in the home and violence in the intimate partner setting. So legal aid and counseling clinics work in terms of psychosocial support for persons who are victims of gender-based violence or survivors is around counseling. We do clinical assessments and evaluations. We provide a host of psychosocial services that are often requested by the court. So survivors and victims who have court matters, both at the magistrates court and the high court level, may be referred to us for counseling and other interventions. Similarly, for perpetrators of violence, once some persons are charged with a gender-based violence offense, an intimate partner violence offense, the court has now, within the context of the domestic violence legislation that we have here, the court can direct perpetrators to participate in a psychoeducational program that is based on holding men accountable for their violence. And finally, to say in terms of the answer to your question, all of these services, once the referrals come from the court, the Royal Grenada Police Force, the Ministry of Social Development, the Child Protection Authority, and a number of other organizations, all of the services I mentioned are provided at no cost to the referees. Once they're referred by the system, there is no cost. Legal aid provides those services free of charge.
And it is very good to know that that kind of legal support is there. Odessa, you also provide some services to people who have experienced this kind of violence in the home. What are some of the things that you have seen, and a little bit about the service that you provide and how it helps?
Well, I don't think that there is anything thus far that I have not seen in terms of domestic violence. I have been fortunate to hear from both the victims and the perpetrators over the last couple of years, because I worked in the prison. I had a gender-based violence workshop being held in the prison on Camp Street specifically, because there are several prison locations here in Guyana. And I was fortunate to speak with a lot of men who had either murdered or inflicted some degree of physical violence in most cases, against women. And I find it a little strange, of course, maybe later on in the discussion as we get into things like how the law deals with these things and if the law is actually protecting victims, because there were at least 3 men that I can recall who had murdered women prior to the incident that they were serving for. So they served time and they came out, they moved on. That's somebody, well, naturally, because the first person would have died. And then they killed that second person and is back again serving time. So that, in my judgment, says that, you know, something is missing somewhere. It should not just be a matter of being incarcerated, but looking at, you know, how do we fix what is broken. But as an artist, and I consider myself to be relatively well known here in Guyana as an artist, and because I have a social media presence, people tend to feel as though they know you personally. So because I talk on gender-based violence and a number of other women issues, I was eventually forced to start a Facebook group. It's called Sister Support. And lots of women have joined Sister Support, not just Guyanese in Guyana. We have Guyanese outside of Guyana. We also have non-Guyanese, Trinidadians and so forth, who are part of the group. And we try to ensure that we can network, be it with Red Thread, be it with SASAD and all these other NGOs who offer services. So women will come, they will speak to us, and if they would like to, at that time, get additional help, seek counseling, and all those sorts of things, we're able to refer them, whichever part of the world you are, to the organizations, the institutions that are there to help you to get through those problems. And I feel like, you know, we have got to find non-conventional ways of meeting women in domestic violence situations, because, you know, now with the pandemic, lots of people are at home. Very many people are forced to use the internet. And so it's important for us to look at how can we meet those women who are on social media, who may be faced with these specific problems. And that is why, of course, we started Sister Support, so that we could reach out to women. And sometimes just in the group, you might decide today that, you know what, I would like to share my story. I'd like to share my experience with the women in terms of what I went through as it relates to domestic violence. Of course, the group is not limited to domestic violence, but in you sharing your story, very many people are inclined to come out. They tend to feel more comfortable, and it's a safe space. And so that encourages a lot of people to come out and to get help at a time that they're ready to get help, because not everybody who comes out is ready to receive help at that time.
If I can come in here.
I was, sorry.
No, you go, Ambassador.
Thank you. I wanted to just come in here because Odessa mentioned about with the pandemic and people having to stay home. Not just that they're more on using the internet, but also they're more susceptible to violence in the home, both partners as well as children. And this is something that we keep seeing more and more of. And I don't have the figures to tell you whether we're one in 5 or 1 in 2 or whatever who are suffering from intimate partner violence. But the truth is, a lot of people will not speak about it. Historically, and I recall growing up in rural Jamaica, which is where I currently reside again, when people suffered from intimate partner violence and went to the police used to say, oh, we're not getting involved in that because that is man and woman story. I remember growing up with that, but I'm very pleased to say that things have changed. And they've putting, I think in every single police station in Jamaica now, there is at least one person who is trained in order to deal with a person who comes in to make such a report. And we have different groups that do this. One of the things that I have done is that I'm a trained mediator and also a trainer. And in the early days of the Dispute Resolution Foundation in Jamaica, we traveled across the island to train police officers and justices of the peace These are people who are in communities and who are available if somebody needs help. Because in those days, we didn't have the kind of structure that we have now. And so I'm very pleased to say that we have moved on. I started talking about this thing in 2000. And if you don't mind, I could just go into my story at the moment, unless you want me to come back, Beverly, to it. But I wanted to make a point.
I want to take a break, and then when we come back, I want you to get right into your story. So don't lose that chain of thought at all. Viewers, we're going to take a very short break, and we will be right back to hear the ambassador's story.
No one should live in fear of the person they love, children included.
This is something that is really becoming an issue within our country, and we need to make necessary steps to stop it.
It seems like sexual violence against women and children has become habitual.
Abusers, Mr. Sickle, it ain't macho to get on. So I said no, I said no, I said no, nowhere.
This has been a message from the Ministry of Social Development, Housing and Community Empowerment in collaboration with its social partners. If you or anyone you know is in need of help, please feel free to contact us at 440-2269. And remember, a life free from violence is possible.
Feel good facts.
Help prevent cold and flu by washing your hands with soap and water for at least 20 seconds. That's the time it takes to remove most germs. No soap and water? No worries when you've got alcohol-based hand sanitizer.
Welcome back, viewers. I know that you're all waiting to hear from the ambassador because she's going to share her story with us. Over to you, Ambassador.
Thank you. As I said before, I started speaking about this matter in 2000. At the time when I first spoke about it, I was a senator in the government of Jamaica, a government senator. And there's an organization here that awarded, when it started, awarded three women every year. It was called La Grande Dame, if you can understand. It meant that, not just that we were my size, but we had contributed to the society in certain ways. And I was being honored by the Kiwanis Club of New Kingston, who had this award every year. If you can imagine, an award in the Pegasus Hotel with probably about 500-600 people there of the top echelon of the Jamaican society. And the week before that award took place, we had some news reports about a shelter that had a breach. A man discovered where the shelter was and went to the shelter and attacked the employees, the persons who were working with the shelter, in an effort to get to his partner who was being protected there. And that brought it back to me. I was so angry, if you can imagine, that this could happen. But what I was really angry about is that this was not being discussed widely in the society. This was not being covered, and there was nobody who was prepared to come out and speak about this kind of violence against women. And every time I talk, there are some people who will say, well, what about men? There is violence against men. And that is true, and I'm not denying that, but the majority of the persons who suffer are in fact women. So I'm getting this award, and we're dressed to the nines. And I am asked by the other two persons who were given the award with me that I should respond on their behalf. And I get up there and I looked at the audience and it just came out. I remember my mother, my aunt, two of my sisters are sitting in the audience. Now, let me tell you about shame. Part of the reason why people do not speak about this or will not even go and report it when it happens to them is shame. So can you imagine this big red woman, me, senator in the government of Jamaica, is going to stand up in front of people? And I did. I talked about the experience, the news report, and the fact that nobody was prepared to talk about it. And I stepped away from the podium and said, look at me. Would you believe that I am a battered woman? Well, let me tell you this. You could hear a collective gasp in the room. And then you could hear a pin drop. So I went back to the podium and I spoke. Now, my experience had occurred 8 years before that. And this was the first time that I was able to speak about it publicly. And it made an impression. Since then, I have been speaking about this matter because, as I said before, not many persons who are at my stage in life, at the time, that was what, 21 years ago, are prepared to talk about this. And I know this because people reach out to me. From then, people reached out to me. I have been on radio, I have been on television, and it's almost as if I'm speaking to a third generation of women, because there are people now who didn't hear me speak 21 years ago. There are people here who didn't hear me speak 15 years ago, 10 years ago, but they're hearing now. And more people are talking about it. My husband was doing his PhD. I wanted to say that from the beginning. And I was a fellow at the university where we were studying. So we're not talking about somebody who is in the lower echelons of the society. We're talking about people who, I'm a lawyer, I was a lawyer for how many years up to that point. And, you know, when it happens to you, you don't believe it is happening. You cannot believe it is happening to you. And then you say to yourself, why is this happening to me? What have I done to cause this man to do this to me? And for a while, you believe that you have done something. And you begin to small up yourself. You don't talk. Your whole personality change. And I'm talking about me. Until you realize that it's not you. You are the victim. It's not you. There is something about that person that causes them to feel that they have to exert power over you by bringing violence to you. And I mean, I don't want to take up all of the time now, but I want to say that you go through these stages. It's not happening. It's something that I have done. Oh, the shame of it. How do I move away from this relationship? What is the support that is in the society that will help me if I'm a person who will not be able to survive with myself and my children if I should step away from this relationship? And you go through all of that. But let me tell you, first and foremost, is shame. It's just because I'm really brazen. And I remember when I was getting counseling when it happened, and I said to my counselor, why would God, I'm a Christian, why would God cause me to go through this? Because I'm a good person. And he said to me, because you are going to be used to speak about this. And I said to him, you must be crazy. Me talk publicly in a small place like Jamaica about man beat me. Look at my size. Who will believe that I allow man? Allow, you hear me use that word? That I allow man to beat me. And I said earlier on that I'm very involved in a couple of organizations that are all over the Caribbean. There are people who are listening now who will be hearing this story from me for the first time because they know me in another sphere. But, you know, this happened when we were abroad, and I left him. I left him and I came back to Jamaica. I picked up my life again, and he tried to come here. And I told him that if he came, and I'm going to say this honestly, I told him that if he came here, there were people here who would kill him and bury him, and nobody would know where he was. And since he was not well known in Jamaica, nobody would be looking for him. And he believed me, thank God. So we didn't have to put that to the test. But that's my story. I talk about it. And what has happened is that it has allowed persons to feel empowered to talk to somebody. Not everybody will speak publicly about it. And I know that because I am constantly asked to speak with persons who are in therapy, or to church groups, or to groups of individuals about my experience and how I dealt with it, and help to talk them through. Many persons are on the spectrum of, one, you're not accepting this has happened, until you move to the point where it says, okay, this has happened. What am I going to do about my life to make sure that I am not killed? Because every day you wake up and you hear about people who are killed in family situations where there are quarrels and whatever. And so I think that that is part of what is my purpose in life, is to talk to people about this and to help. And we have a number of organizations that I can mention later on that have sprung up over the years to help persons, as you have in Guyana, as you have in Grenada, who are suffering from this particular blot on our society. So I will stop there, Beverly.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing that story. And I know we're going to come back to it as we continue through this program. But I wanted to hear from Anselm, because Odessa said something which is very, very interesting, that she does these workshops in the prison, and she knows of men who are in there serving a second sentence for murder. How does that happen?
It is so unfortunate. And let me say this. Much as I'm a criminal defense attorney, and I insist on every accused person having the right to a fair trial by a jury constituted of its peers. It is outrageous what has happened, and this is why in recent times the region, or most of the islands, have introduced a domestic violence act, because it had to come into effect. The practice was too rampant. And I guess it is part of the slave mentality. Yeah? All this, the genesis of black man's reaction, I think, and I am just saying this philosophically, not necessarily condoning anything of the sort. The black woman was always the leader. It is she who carried the family, still does. Every great man could speak of his grandmother, because we have strong black women. And I think sometimes the men, because of their sheer ignorance and this dominance and this macho nonsense that we were brought up in, the only retaliatory thing they can do sometimes is resort to violence, which I don't condone. And I'm happy that we do have a domestic violence act here now, and the magistrates impose appropriate penalties. But the thing is, there is no safety net for battered women. And this is where the state should come in. And I think the United Nations, with the transfer of technology and transfer of funds and NGOs, not as popular as they used to be, ought to come in now to provide a safety net. Because sometimes a battered common law lady, a battered wife, she has the kids sometimes, and even though he goes out of the matrimonial home, or he seeks refuge elsewhere, she is left unprotected. And sometimes it is better for her to move out completely and be sustainable by some income. The state has to come in and help to buffer the deteriorating situation, because rather than decreasing, it's becoming more rampant, and the necessity for more draconian and more stringent laws. Yes.
Yes, but Anselm, if the system works to convict someone who has killed in the setting of domestic violence, gender-based violence, intimate partner violence, and that person is serving a second sentence for the same thing, isn't there a big loophole in the system which allows
Yes.
that to happen?
I do agree with you. I concur with you wholeheartedly. But you know why it happens? Because there are certain sentencing guidelines. And much as this is why sometimes this debate had persisted for centuries, hanging and the death penalty. And as I said initially, I'm an abolitionist because I don't think killing someone necessarily answers the problem that face a society as a consequence, bringing about consequences like murder. Anyway, that is besides the point. What has to happen? This first offender he's the first offender, so he's entitled to certain concessionary conditions set out by sentencing guidelines. So he may not be given the full penalty because sometimes he has pleaded guilty. It's his first offense, and the weighing circumstances, he may get 12 years, 10 years, as the case may be. I have advocated in some quarters where you have this type, just as you have capital and non-capital murder, where you have this type of murder, especially with respect to women, that should be treated for purposes of sentencing similarly to capital offenses, like killing a policeman or killing a doctor, as the case may be. So I think we have to revise our guidelines upward because it acts as a deterrent. For example, there's a bill now contemplated before Parliament called the National Sex Offenders Registry 2020. Now, fellows like myself, on the human rights aspect of it, we have been catering and clamoring for some registry because you have all kinds of sex offenders coming in here, posing as tourists too, doing all kinds of things, and there are no registry, there are no guidelines. They come back and, as you said, they repeat again and they strangle someone and God knows. Now we have a registry that would register all sex offenders nationally and those coming in. I guess the Act contemplates some sort of regional or international registry of this nature, either through certain Commonwealth instruments or through the United Nations ultimately, because countries get together and take protective measures to ensure that these sort of crimes, especially against womenfolk, it's uncivilized and ought to be dealt with utmost severity. And even as a criminal defense attorney, I don't condone anything, and I have had a hand in the doing to get a sex registry act here in Grenada, and I commend the bill.
Yes, and I would like to hear from the rest of the panel. How would a Sex Offenders Act contribute really to controlling this type of violence against women, especially against minors, including children? A registry in and of itself, how can that work to help? Any one of the panelists who want to jump in and say something on that, please do, because I have my own views on this sex offenders registry.
If I may, Bev, I think the Sex Offenders Registry has a place now, given what is happening, and the fact that a good majority of our children have been, our young people and currently children, have been exposed to sexual molestation, indecent assault, and so forth. And what we tend to see happening a lot is offenders being moved. They move from parish to parish, they move from community to community. So there is a place for that. But with every other type of legislation, anything you do, you have to have effective enforcement, right? We have great legislation on the books, but if we don't have effective enforcement, then offenders can get away, they can slip through loopholes. And in addition to effective enforcement, we have to have two other things that are key. One would be general public education, and then we also need to have good safety nets. Because a lot of the women we see who end up in relationships or who are in relationships where there is some abuse, we have to understand that the abusers generally use abuse as a form of power and control in relationships. And the power of and control derives from their feeling of superiority because they have access to financial resources, because they provide for families. And sometimes victims and survivors may end up in relationships that they feel not knowing, not having any access to information about the prior convictions and so forth of the persons that they're getting into relationships with. They feel that this person may be able to contribute to the welfare, well-being, upkeep of their families, and they take a chance on love or they take a chance on a relationship. They become intimate with someone because we live in a society where a lot of the needs of our families are not met adequately from the family's income, right? So sometimes persons are forced to um, lean on, depend on, turn to other persons who they feel may be able to support them in a relationship of partners, right? But sometimes one partner decides that it's okay or chooses to use violence as a way of expressing themselves in the relationship. So I really feel that we need to look at a number of things: enforcement, education, social safety nets as provided by the government and the non-government sector where possible. And we have to also understand that even when the justice system works well, society has a big role to play. The final thing I will say here for the moment is that the reason that gender-based violence, family violence, and sexual violence is such a predominant problem in our Caribbean context is because they operate under a certain, what I call a conspiracy of silence. A lot of people know, but they decide not to say anything. They discourage offenders from, survivors from reporting. They make deals where offenders pay off survivors, and especially children, where families, are prepared to take some money on the side to make the case go away. So this conspiracy of silence, where the general public knows and is either not saying anything or actively discouraging survivors and victims from reporting, plays into to this problem quite a lot.
If I may add my 2 cents on this topic as well, I do believe that that there is a place. My thing is, recently, I'm trying to remember what the stats were, but I think it was just over 1,000 children had reportedly been abused. And it sent me back to the place where the ambassador was just speaking from, where you have so many persons who do not actually report these instances. So when I saw over 1,000, I was very worried and very concerned, because I too know that very many people who are part of or who would have experienced any form of violence or abuse, very few of them actually report it. So you can only imagine the actual number of persons, the actual number of children in this instance who would have been abused. And I think that that is something for major concern. I do believe that that it has to be some form of database, something that could also be accessed. And my thing is, incarceration is one thing, but what do we do in terms of counseling, in terms of training, in terms of programs in prison that will ensure that persons come out reformed, that the same man who raped a child 5 years ago, 10 years ago, is not coming back out on the streets. He should be a totally different person. In the case where I was working in the prison on gender-based violence, none of the inmates were obligated to be part of the sessions. Absolutely none. And that for me is not necessarily something that I would have liked it to be that way. Luckily for me, I was liked as an artiste. So a lot of men came to the sessions because they wanted to be in my session. And that's how it started out. And as a result of that, a lot of the times people go and they have boring lectures on things like gender-based violence. So I felt like it needed to be something that is specific to them, that they can relate to, that they can understand, because language is also very important. You know, I see, very many people say it is important for us to have education in terms of gender-based violence and all these things. But I do believe that the education has to be tailored to the people. And in very many instances, we see general education, not specific to a group. So we continue to get the information out there, but lose a sector. And so I think that that is something that we should also consider, looking at making it part of, I don't know if it's law or if it will become a policy or whatever it is, but it should be mandatory for these men to have to be part of certain sets of programs and not just general programs, because people could be in prison and they could be a part of some creative arts program, part of an academic program, and they can have their sentence reduced based on being part of all these other things, which has nothing directly to do with their problem. I'm not saying that it should be discouraged, most certainly not, because of course it's good to be involved in these things as well, but it should be mandatory for them to have some degree of training that says to me that this is not the same person that is coming out of prison to now rape another set of children, another set of women, another set of young boys, another set of teens. You know, these are things that we have to be cognizant of. Do we just want people to go to prison and come out back, or do we want to have actual change?
All right, and I'm going to ask you to hold on that. We are going to take another very short break, and when we come back, we want to hear from Vanda. I'm going to have Vanda put a lot of stuff on the table because she's having real challenges with her internet, and we don't want to lose her before hearing what she has to say. Don't go away, viewers. Get your cup of tea or cup of coffee and hurry right back as we continue with this very, very informative and quite riveting discussion.
I remember when this beach was really wide, a place to picnic and play cricket.
And we used to go up to the end to get away from all the people. Now all the beach gone.
Coastal erosion. When the sea starts to come in and take the land away, everyone loses something.
Granny, look how the waves are washing right under that house.
Coastal erosion. It's a hazard. Hazards. Take control. Reduce your loss. What can you do to help stop coastal erosion? For one, don't drive four-wheel vehicles on seaside dunes. They loosen sand and destroy binding vegetation, causing erosion. Find out more about coastal erosion and other hazards at your local disaster office.
A message from the National Disaster Management Agency and SEDERA.
Men are not made to physically abuse women.
It's something that has become a serious problem in our country, or has been a serious problem in our country. Abuse could present itself in many forms. It could be physical, verbal or emotional, and the most egregious, sexual.
It's not a good look. It's not right in no form. So domestic violence against women should stop. How can you hit a woman, beat a woman?
Every form of abuse has an effect on the individual abuse, on their family members, on children, even the community as a whole.
I'm a man. I came out of a woman. I love my mother. I love my nieces. So to the children, if you're being abused, talk to somebody that you trust and get your message to the person.
This has been a message from the Ministry of Social Development, Housing and Community Empowerment in collaboration with its social partners. If you or anyone you know is in need of help, please feel free to contact us at 440-2269. And remember, a life free from violence is possible.
Welcome back to all the viewers to this edition of Time to Face the Facts. I'm your host, Beverly Sinclair, and I have with me Ambassador Alun Asamba from Jamaica. I have Odessa Primus from Guyana. I have Anselm Clouden from Grenada. I also have Tyrone Buckmeyer from Grenada, and I have Vanda Razik from Guyana. I hope I covered everyone there. And we are looking at the issue of violence in the home and some of the stories coming out of that and what should happen and what is happening to deal with that situation. I'm going to call on Vanda. Vanda is one of those persons who is in an organization that reports to the parliament in her country. And before we went on the break, we were talking about making some things mandatory for these offenders when they get into prison so that they do not come out back the same person as they went in. Vanda, is there any hope within the parliamentary system that we could have some of these laws pushed through? And you mentioned earlier that Guyana has a very high number of female parliamentarians. So what is the hope? What's the reality of having some laws put in place for mandatory counseling and training to have some of these men reformed?
Okay, thanks, Beverly. I actually missed a whole lot. I got cut off in the middle of Ambassador's powerful testimony, but I'm now back. So thank you very much for seeing me back. So, Beverly, I don't want to spend time speaking about Parliament. Please forgive me, or the women there, because although I commend those that are there, I encourage women, especially young women, to go into politics in a decent and ethical way. I am rather disappointed, generally speaking, in terms of the implementation powers that the parliament have as well with the legislation that they pass. And I don't know if it's what's with the rest of the Caribbean. I know Jamaica got a lot of division in their parliament. And by the way, 2 of its members on both sides of the House have recently been exposed as being violent. Anyway, that's that. In Guyana, I believe that the civil society and the rest of the society has to push and push and push. In my experience, the laws and legislation that have been passed over the years in Parliament, and Beverly, Guyana has 22 laws and policies and treaties that have been done. And yet look at the state of violence in our country. So the laws are not enough. The MPs are not enough. They mostly want to attack each other instead of attacking the issues of violence in our society. Sorry for being so blunt, but bless them all. Anyway, I want to say that I want to, first of all, endorse what Odessa said, that I do believe, although counseling is always voluntary, but when you're in jail, I believe it's an opportunity to make it mandatory. And it does need to be put across in a way that, like Odessa's style and her artistry and so on, where people will want to listen and learn. So that is important, and I really commend her and her work. In jail, the men, I do believe it needs to be mandatory, and I think that is something, Odessa, we will bring forward to our parliament for what it is worth. Thank you. However, I think men also need to play a role in counseling men. So in Guyana, we are fortunate in having, at least I know 2 of them, excellent men who do man-to-man counseling on violence and violent behavior. And I will call their name, Colin Marks and Kevin Messiah. And they've been doing a really wonderful job in speaking to boys and men about violence behavior. We also had, through a partnership with my commission and the University of Guyana's Institute for Gender Studies, there was some interesting research and surveys done with men. And out of that was a magazine, so, illustrated in a nice popular form, where men testified. And, the overall theme of the men was growing up in a rape culture in Guyana. And many men spoke, and they were men, we were a multi-ethnic place in Guyana, so we had men from all the ethnicities, including indigenous. And it was a common theme that the society generally, when they were growing up anyway, endorsed the entitlement of boys and men. A lot of them were beaten when they were young. And, this corporal punishment nonsense that we have in the Caribbean is a big root cause of why our societies continue to be violent. If you grow up in a home where you are beaten, and the people beating you are those that are supposed to love you, that are those that are supposed to care and protect you, that those are there in that authority position and all of that in the home, and you are beaten all the time, well, or when you grow up, and if you're a boy, well, you practice what you learn, which is beating the girl or the woman in your life. And the girls and the women, well, this is what we know. We're supposed to be beaten. We're supposed to be violently disciplined in our schools and in our homes. And it's a scourge, Beverly. And I know a lot of people quote the Bible, but spoil the rod and all that nonsense. But what about Jesus? Suffer the little ones to come unto me. I don't know why the pastors who are perpetrating the violent disciplining of children do not quote Jesus himself. Right now in Guyana, just in December 2020, 113 boys were sexually abused. And that is from the official Child Protection Agency, which is headed by Anne Green, that really has her work cut out for her. In terms of the report in 2019 from the CPA, there were 4,179 cases of abuse of children, and 841, or 20% of that, was sexual violence, child sexual abuse. It is increasing. The sexual abuse cases are increasing in all sectors of our society, from the rural areas to the indigenous areas to the urban and peri-urban centers. It's like another pandemic that is hitting us. And there was, one of the reports from the NGOs were titled Cries in the Dark. And it is also true that under COVID, in the 2 years of COVID, or wherever we're going with COVID, there has been an increase, a large increase in violence in the home against women, intimate party violence, sexual child abuse, and just general child abuse, beating and so on in the home. So I think that the Caribbean really could benefit from a real study on where, COVID has exposed a lot of things to the bone. And one of the things COVID is exposing is the depth and the breadth of violence in our homes, whether it's domestic, whether it's intimate party violence, whether it is child violence. And I think, Beverly, unless the Caribbean is prepared to stop the violent disciplining of children from the cradle up to when they kill them in the grave, we are not going to be able to really stem the tide of having such violent societies in our Caribbean. It really, it really needs to change. And just finally, all the reports and all the studies have shown that the society is, we have an embedded kind of, generally speaking, where we accept violence. We kind of accept it. And I go back to, if we accept violence in the schools and we accept the beating of these children, the children as young as 2 and so on have been raped, babies have been raped, and then they're beaten, even lying down in the crib. You have reports of the people beating them on the head. I mean, come on. And then in the school, they have to be beaten. It is completely outrageous. And I'm very passionate on stopping this cycle. And again, for men, the reports have said that we need to have spaces. Spaces are needed for men, safe spaces, and boys to open up and speak about their own violent childhood, their own violent instincts, or their anger and their entitlement to beat. What ambassador said, because it's to do with power. It's not to do with love. It's to do with power over. And you must have power over and take it to the bitter end. And so I think men and violence, and we have to try as best we can to have men speak to men and men help to change the outlook. And these spaces, these safe spaces for men to be able to open up and speak about their own violence. And most of it is rooted in their childhood. So, thank you very much. And Odessa, we got to get together in Guyana, and we maybe got to make a joint appeal. You could do a whole rap or whatever it is you do, and come to Parliament. Maybe they will understand that more than all the millions of reports and recommendations that we make. So thanks, Michaela.
Vanda talks about a place for men. Tyrone, wasn't there a Caribbean, or isn't there a Caribbean men's network which was designed to help men to do just some of those things that Vanda was talking about?
Yes, actually, indeed. And I'm very happy to hear of my great friends and colleagues, Colin and Kevin in Guyana. There are many other men in Guyana, in fact, I could mention, who have been involved in the work. The Caribbean Male Action Network was, in fact, created, established in 2006, and has a regional presence from Guyana in the south all the way up to the Bahamas. And it is a network of men and organizations that work with men that are very much involved in the issue of social justice and working with men and boys to end gender-based violence. So I think when we listen to the statistics and so on, it is easy to feel depressed, frustrated, angry, overwhelmed. But the good news is there are programs in the region that address violence against women and family violence, and it happens both for victims and for perpetrators. I'll give you two quick examples. There's a regional program called Partnership for Peace, which over the last 16 years has been rolled out in 7 countries in the Caribbean. It was piloted in Grenada in 2005. We call it Man to Man, the Man to Man program in Grenada. It is in Guyana, Barbados, the British Virgin Islands, St. Lucia, Trinidad and Tobago. We made 2 visits to Guyana over the years to try to introduce the program there. We worked with the magistracy and the police, but it never got off the ground in Guyana. The Bahamas is about to begin to implement it. That program is based on 2 underpinning philosophies. One is perpetrator accountability, because we have to hold men accountable for their violent behavior. But over the course of the 16 weeks of the Partnership for Peace program, we help men to examine, where did their violent behavior come from? Where did they get these notions that it is okay to think you must manage the women in your life? You must take charge of them in the way that they must obey you. So we look at their family history. We look at where the origin of the violent behavior. And the program is really premised around getting them to accept A, responsibility for their actions, holding them accountable, and then B, to ensure that victims are safe. So that is a Partnership for Peace. That is how it is called. It was rolled out in 2005. In the 7 different countries where it is operational, there have been different names used locally. So the Grenada name is a Man-to-Man program. We have run the Man-to-Man program since 2005. We just started cycle 32. Now, this is a 16-week-long intervention. And over 32 cycles, we've now interfaced with more than 550 men. They are mainly referred by the courts. And then we also have a program called Changes, which is a survivors empowerment program for women that is based on helping women to understand that there is this issue of power and control. We do have issues of very toxic masculinity. Some of the lessons that we as men have been taught in the Caribbean are very, very toxic. We've been taught to be violent and controlling and beastly in order to show that we are men and our manhood is intact. And we have to work with men to understand that these notions have no place in a modern society. But we also have to work with victims to understand that we can help to empower them, to help them to seek different kinds of relationships that are nurturing and supportive for them and their families. So I want us to feel encouraged that the region has very progressive legislation in most of our countries in terms of domestic violence. We have had a good history in the last 20 years of training of police in terms of how to handle and respond to gender-based violence, because a lot of people still say, as Ambassador noted, they don't want to report because the police will laugh them out of the station. The police will tell them, as man and woman business, we don't want to get involved. So things are changing slowly, but they're changing. And I want us to continue conversations like this so that we together across the islands of the region can come together in forums like these to discuss how do we do even more of what we're doing and how do we do it better.
We're going to take a very short break, and Ambassador, I'm going to come back to you. That is exactly where I want to go. So we're going to take a short break again on this edition of Time to Face the Facts. Viewers, do not leave your seat. We will be right back.
This has been a message from the Ministry of Social Development, Housing and Community Empowerment in collaboration with its social partners. If you or anyone you know is in need of help, please feel free to contact us at 440-2269. And remember, a life free from violence is possible.
An earthquake can happen at any time. Be aware. Drop, cover, hold on. Crouch and cover your head with your arms. Hold firm in an internal doorway. Avoid running outside or using stairs. Stay away from elevators and move away from outer walls, glass windows, and hanging objects. Remember, when the earth quakes, do the DCH. Drop, cover, hold on. Now, are you ready? Yes! We're ready!
Visit weready.org, brought to you by Sedema and the European Union.
Feel good facts.
Remember, if you have flu symptoms, do the right thing and stay at home to avoid giving it to others. Remember, you can be infectious up to a week after developing symptoms, so rest up and take it easy.
Welcome back, viewers, to this very, very exciting edition of Time to Face the Facts. We are looking at violence in the home, violence in the societies, and just how we treat with this whole scourge of gender-based, intimate partner-based, domestic violence that people do not even want to talk about in our societies. I'm Beverly Sinclair, your host, and I have with me quite an esteemed panel from across the region. Ambassador Aluna Samba from Jamaica. We have Odessa Primus and Vanda Razik from Guyana. And we have Tyrone Buckmeyer and Anselm Clouden from Grenada. Ambassador, we are coming right back to you. We want to hear your perspective on the things discussed earlier about teaching men to own up to their responsibilities and to take control of their actions.
Thank you very much for that. A number of things that were said I wanted to just comment on. Not just the teaching men to own up to their responsibilities. That is very, very important. And I don't know what is the expression that is used in the Eastern Caribbean and Guyana. In Barbados, I know an expression called soft man. Mm-hmm. In Jamaica, it's called mama man. Mm-hmm. Which is a very denigratory expression to use to describe men. And invariably, when men come forward to say, I have had this experience, that is the reaction from communities and from people around them. And so again, it comes back to the issue of shame. And how do you help men to cope when that happens to them. And that is something that I think as communities we have to deal with. But I wanted to just touch on an issue that Anselm talked about, and it is about sentencing guidelines. We last week had a matter which was heard in the Supreme Court, and it is a really heartrending situation where a man raped his stepdaughter and had a child with that stepdaughter, and then raped that daughter.
And I think we just lost internet connectivity there with the ambassador.
Miss Sinclair, if you don't mind, if I can add in the meantime.
Yes, please.
I think that a lot of you look at the trending words and phrases and so on that are being used on social media, and one of the things is normalize this and normalize that, and I think one of the things we need to normalize is having our children be raised in a way so that our boys or our sons become gentlemen and our women ladies. And I think a lot of the times we don't pay enough attention to the person that we're raising. I guess I don't know if it's because they don't have to be with you after a period, but that is, I believe, one of the things that we need to do. And I hear a lot of people talking about the system, and if I can make reference to our own system here, which I'm happy, of course, that there are laws and policies and all these things in place to help in areas of GBV, gender-based violence. I think that there are very many loopholes, and in those loopholes, we have major problems. I remember when I first started my work in the prison, because I was there representing an organization called Marunda here in Guyana, and a young man told me that there was a gentleman who was just released, I think a couple of days before I started. But what had happened was his neighbor told him that when he leaves to go into the cane fields, a gentleman would come over. And so what he decided to do was pretend to go to work one day. And he sat in a nearby bush, filing his cutlass or machete or whatever it is, and waiting for the gentleman to come. And then he eventually showed up, and the guy charged into the house. Based on his account, they were having sex. And so he pulled a weapon with the intention of murdering the woman and the man, but he could not do it. And so he hurled violent words, phrases, terms, whatever at them. And eventually the woman made a report and they went to court. Long story short, he was asked to stay a certain distance away from her. And so he was also asked to move out of what was his home. And she remained there. And so when he went to court, I think the fine was just a couple $1,000. It was not a big fine that he was asked to pay. But he requested to be held in the lockup, in prison. This is not even the lockup, this is the prison system, until he pays this money. Paying the money was not the problem, but he wanted that time out. And I asked the question, what happens to the men who are not thinking the way he did, in terms of saying, listen, I need a space to go to cool out? What happens to those men who are now sent back home or sent to find somewhere else to live? And then you find in many cases, those men go, they murder their loved ones and all these sorts of things. So I just kind of feel that in these little void, we need to ensure that these gaps are filled, because that is a situation that could have gone very, very wrong. And so I just thought I'd share that bit with you guys as well.
Thank you for sharing. And I see the ambassador is back, so she's going to continue telling us about that incident in the court.
Case, yes.
Yes.
And I thank you very much. You know, we live in the Caribbean. We had a power cut. And so I had my internet went, my power went, and I had to find my trusted MiFi, which is what I'm using now. When you live Well, anywhere in Jamaica. I don't know about the rest of you, but I have to walk around with this thing because the internet isn't everywhere. But I was talking about this case, and the lawyers made the case that they were appealing on sentence. Now, when I said it, as I said, the grandfather, you know, the man raped his stepdaughter and then went and raped the stepdaughter's daughter. It is terrible. But as Ansel said, there are sentencing guidelines. And a person who has been convicted and who is of the view that the sentence was not correct can in fact appeal the sentence, which is what happened. And I'll tell you that the lawyers who acted on behalf of the appellant has been getting a hard time because, as Vanda said, in Jamaica, we're dealing with two incidents. One with a sitting MP, and there is a video, and it is alleged that the gentleman in the video is in fact the sitting MP, and he has not come out and denied it. We have another incident where somebody made a claim against somebody who is a former MP, but who is still involved in the political process. He has denied that he carried out any of those acts, and the police has been brought in. He has actually filed a claim for defamation that, you know, because he has come out and said he denies it altogether. It asked the police to investigate. The police said they had no evidence. Nobody came forward. They can find no evidence to support the allegations that are being made. So that is something that we are dealing with right now, and people are very conscious, even more than ever. And Vanda spoke about, she didn't hear me because she was off at the time, but the increase in this kind of activity because people are now at home more than they have been before. We are under curfew, which means that during the course of the week, you have to be home and off the streets by 8 o'clock. On the weekends, it's 4 o'clock and 2 o'clock, which means that some of the activities that people would have that take them out of the home, you know how this happens. Men want to go to the bar, have a drink. There's a particular joke that I see on the internet that says, this lockdown is killing me. I have to drink at home now, and I even asked my wife for her telephone number. It's a joke. But the truth is, our lives have been changed, and we are actually seeing the effect of being in close quarters. Because, you know, when we talk about curfew and staying home, what does home mean for a lot of our people? I mean, home for me might mean something, which means everybody in my home have their own room and we have a public area and so on. Home for many families is a small room. And if you can't go outside and you can't be on the road, I know many, many people, and probably one of the first criminal cases that I was involved in was somebody who was charged for loitering. And I discovered that you have to prove why you are not loitering. You know, that was one of the laws that was put in place after emancipation to get to lock up the slaves if they were found where they were not supposed to be. And I learned from having to do that case that many people had nowhere to socialize and entertain themselves other than the one room that a family might live in. And so wherever there's a light, an electric light post, people would sit out there and play dominoes or would be with their friends out there. And, you know, unfortunately, when you say that you are under curfew and you have to stay, the expression that is used in Jamaica, tana your yard. Not everybody staying home under the same conditions. And while I'm not using that to say it is any excuse for the kind of violence that we're seeing, the fact of the matter is that being in small spaces with a lot of people tend to get anger and frustration build up. I do not condone any kind of violence, but sometimes it happens. You know, the other thing I wanted to talk about is and I mentioned it before, the attitude of the police, but it is changing. But a few months ago, when we were under more severe curfew than this, a lady found herself at a police station after curfew hours to report that she was being battered by her partner. And do you know what she was told? And I can speak about this because it was in the news and everybody knows about it. She was told to go back home and come back the next day. And she was also told that the police had a mind to lock her up for breaching the curfew.
Right. I remember that story.
Exactly. So these are the things that we are having to deal with now as a society, which seems to be making it more difficult for people to cope. And this is where the work that you are doing, Tyrone, and what you do, Odessa and Vanda, is important, because the support that families need is even more important now. Helping men to recognize that battering their women, or women to recognize that battering their men is not how to deal with your frustrations, your anger, and your disappointment. And that is, I think, where we need a lot of work to be done. And I will stop now because I see Anselm trying to speak.
Yes, Anselm, let's
hear from you. I just wish to be given the opportunity to say how eloquent Her Excellency has been during the conduct of this program. I wish to just, she has evidence disposition that makes me feel so disappointed that we haven't had a federation, because ultimately Jamaica would have led. And no doubt she may have emerged as the Prime Minister of the West Indian Federation. The Jamaicans always do such a marvelous job, and I'm so delighted to have heard Ambassador give an exposition of her own community in lockdown time. Thank you so much, Your Excellency.
Thank you very much, Anselm. And we are going to take our final break. We have almost run out of time on this edition of Time to Face the Facts, but we are going to take this final break. And when we come back, panelists, think about it while we go on the break. When we come back, I want to hear from each of you on this issue. This type of violence happens in the home. Most of the interventions are after the fact. How do we get inside the home to try and mitigate some of this kind of violence? Think about it, and we'll be right back to answer that question on this edition of Time to Face the Facts.
Feel good facts.
Remember, if you have flu symptoms, do the right thing and stay at home to avoid giving it to others. Remember, you can be infectious up to a week after developing symptoms, so rest up and take it easy.
No one should live in fear of the person they love, children included.
This is something that is really becoming an issue within our country, and we need to make necessary steps to stop it.
It seems like sexual violence against women and children has become habitual.
Abusers. Mr. Sickle, it ain't macho to get on so. I said no, I said no, I said no, nowhere.
This has been a message from the Ministry of Social Development, Housing and Community Empowerment in collaboration with its social partners. If you or anyone you know is in need of help, please feel free to contact us at 440-2269. And remember, a life free from violence is possible.
Thank you.
Welcome back, viewers, to this edition of Time to Face the Facts. I'm your host, Beverly Sinclair. I have with me quite an esteemed panel as we look at issues relating to violence in the home. What can we do about it? I have from Grenada, Tyrone Buckmeyer and Anselm Plowden. I have from Guyana, Vanda Radzik and Odessa Primus. And I have from Jamaica, Ambassador Alun Asamba. And we are looking at the issue from so many different angles, but we are coming to one nexus. And we asked the question before we went on the break, how do we get inside the home to try and mitigate some of this violence? Is there any law that can be put in place that could strengthen that kind of intervention from inside rather than just wait until it happens and deal with it from the outside? Tyrone, do you want to go first?
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, thank you for the opportunity. And as we wrap up, I want to say, I think it's important for us to understand that can children can be very good ambassadors, can be wonderful agents for change, and that in any of these social interventions that we want to do, we have to begin to work with children at the school level. In the years of my work, I've had instances where I was called into a preschool, for example, where a 4-year-old hit a 4-year-old boy hit a 4-year-old girl on the playground in the preschool. And when the teacher asked him why he did that, he says, that's what daddy does do to mommy when she don't behave herself. Just to suggest that he is already learning about this idea of toxic masculinity and power and control. So if we can't get into the home, I don't think we need to try to go via legislation, because when we legislate things, people then try to find ways around it. I think one of the big focus has to be on education, public awareness building, speaking to children in school, helping them to learn conflict resolution, conflict management, effective communication, ways to deal with disagreements and arguments with people without resorting to violence. And we can do that throughout the entire spectrum of the educational institutions, from preschool all the way up to university level. And if we do that, we will get a very wide cross-section of our community, our population. And then we work with women and men wherever we find them in the workplace and so on, with broad-based public education, using artists, using social media, using popular theater, and all those means that are at our disposal. I want to finally say, let us not be despondent and feel hopeless, because the region is changing. We've seen a lot of positive development, and I think we can continue to see some if activists and advocates continue to do their part. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tyrone. Vanda, are you still with us? We want to hear from you on this issue. How can we mitigate rather than just react to these incidents, this type of violence in our society?
Okay, so I'll go with two prongs. The first one, to pick up from Tyrone, is indeed education. And and I think that because the schools are institutional, we can roll out programs in the schools. The education has to focus on human beings. We should have an education on human rights and on civics, on alternative behaviors to violent behavior, alternatives to violent behaviors. All of this could be very beautifully packaged in learnings from nursery all the way up to a university. My own advocacy, and others that are with me on this, is that we should have CXE. We should have CXE exams, mandatory actually, on human rights and on these kind of alternatives to violence, so that it's not just by choice. It's like a compulsory exam that you have to take at CXE, and all the way through you're learning and doing these better behaviors under the whole ceiling of human rights and so on. I think that parenting is something that, again, could be done in a way that parents, everybody, not just the elite educated kind of parents, but this is for everybody, young parents. I don't believe so many of the mothers and fathers are absent. They may be in jail. They may certainly in the diaspora in Canada, New York, and all over the place. They left to get work. That is the situation in Guyana. Grandmothers have to now parent. They're not able to do it. And so the parenting might be something, a colleague of ours did a beautiful manuals on parenting, and they were also done for indigenous peoples. So it was in their languages, and they were really very, should I say, kind of upful activities and that kind of thing based in community and reality. So I am definitely an education, but I also want to say that for the women and girls that are being abused, I do believe that we need to legislate, or we need to have something in place that would also provide for emergency funding, some kind of bridging, because the reason that so many women are forced to go back into the violent relations is because they have no money to look after themselves and the children. And I believe if we're going to be serious about this, we have to put in these emergency bridging funds, something that allows women who want to leave the ability to leave, because it is when women decide to leave that they are actually most vulnerable to violence, being burnt in the bed, being chopped with a cutlass, the children and them killed, and all of that. So I think that needs to be put in place. I want to just add here something I wanted to say earlier, that access to justice is very low. In remote communities and small communities, we are a massive indigenous population. There is no justice anywhere. There's no access to justice. There are no lawyers. There are no courts. There are no counselors. The police are not there at all, and so on. And then sometimes what happens is the community tries to deal with these domestic violence, intimate party violence in their small communities. And a lot of the time, they would choose a pastor or a leader, male, who in fact may be very backward, with apologies, and then would just say, oh, stay, and you got to bear it, and the Bible say you got to bear it, and whatever. And so, it perpetrates this thing all the time. And whereas in many countries, you have mobile courts, you have a bus or you have a boat going to a remote community that takes the court, the magistrate or the judge, takes the police, takes the legal aid people, takes the counselors, takes the health officials. And you have all of that going into these remote communities and doing it. And our Chief Justice, Roxanne George, is an advocate of this kind of mobile, what do they call it? Mobile court. In some places, it's called mobile houses of justice. If we want to transform our societies, we have to have innovative ways that will work to bring justice to our people. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Vanda. And Slim, Tyrone has said if you legislate, people will find ways to get around the legislation. How can we be more proactive instead of reactive to violence in the homes?
Let me tell you, I think our first step, the alleviation of poverty. Poverty has visited us here in the Caribbean for the past decade, and now everything has gone upside down, how they say, topsy-turvy because of COVID. So don't blame too much what is happening in the context of the violence at the home. It's multifaceted, the multiplicity of reasons, and we have to get to the rock bottom of it. It was once said that you won't have a good society until there is a return of order and discipline to the home. Society starts from unity, from the home, it goes into plurality. It is my respectful view that legislation by itself, and law without order is tyranny, and order without law is chaos. So that we have to find a balance. We have to find a happy medium, whereby with a level of social engineering to inculcate certain values, as I said, as the distinguished ambassador indicated, Her Excellency, law children was designed to punish those who were disadvantaged. So that I remember as a boy, when I came down from Carrefour, where we had no electricity, and came into St. George's in the Avenue, as boys at GBSS, that was the only secondary school then, we played domino under the street light. and I'm talking years ago, and from time to time, the cops would pass by, and then we were little young soccer players, cricket players, having a good time, but we had no lights, and you couldn't burn lights where you live, So that this is why I really appreciated the sentiment. We would not have a society that approximates some kind of egalitarianism with the youths. Look at children, before they get up, the mothers, they're in a daycare, they're before a little tube, no time, no cuddling, no hugging. The home is the center of the society at large. And we have to deal there, alleviate the poverty there, and do the social engineering educationally and what have you. And then you're moving to juvenile justice. And from there, you move on. Our prisons are always overfilled. I mean, so forget about rehabilitation and all that sort of, and that's why you have recidivists. Because they have no social programs, poverty again. And our leaders, they're so inept. This is why, I say, I hope that CARICOM is a waste of time. I hope that we find a way to federate. And maybe we federate as we can Zoom now. And look how the COVID has given a byproduct that we can communicate regionally without being present. An advent of technology. So, look, man, the great progress for us. But we have to do it unified because our children everywhere is suffering. A home in Jamaica, Ratin is a home in Grenada, same condition. So, we want people. And let us get together and look after our children.
Thank you very much, Anselm. And Odessa, same thing. How can we be more proactive instead of reactive and maybe save some people in our society from this kind of violence?
Well, I do believe that it is important for us to think about possible incidents, and not just violence, but different things that our children are likely to encounter, that we've encountered, that we've heard other people who would have had similar challenges in life. It is important for us to put things in place to protect our children as much as we possibly can from those things happening. In this case specifically, we're talking about domestic violence. But in terms of being more proactive, I think one of the important things, when I was at school just a few years ago, I there was a subject that we did at school which was not done at an exam level, but it was called general studies. And during general studies, we were taught a number of things that prepared us for life. And I think that we need to go back to having things like general studies where subjects and discussions on domestic violence and so on were done under general studies. It is also important for us to look at how we can use different opportunities. I guess because I was also in the education system, and I heard someone who mentioned earlier that maybe we could look at having it be a CXE subject and these sorts of things. But there are similar topics that are done for social studies at the CXE level, where children are asked to respond to questions on particular social issues. So that does come up. However, unless you're doing that particular subject, then that stops at probably like third form, fourth form. So I think that we should try to use as much as we can opportunities, even in essay writing, because teachers can skillfully weave this into very many situations to find little opportunities to have these discussions. It is also important to, we have a number of Calypsonians across the Caribbean. We have soca artists. We have lots of people who are well loved across the region. For them to also include positive messages in their songs. I mean, everything don't have to be tailored to domestic violence, but little pockets of information could be dropped here and there. We have dub poetry becoming, a big thing now. So I think that we, outside of, because, I don't want to again reinforce the fact that parents have a role to play, but there are some parents who cannot play that role, and we have to be cognizant of that. And so I think in the absence of that, we should try to fill every other block. The more often you hear something and see it, becomes part of you. And that's what we should try to do, be it on billboards, in the news, in wherever it is. We need to have opportunities, teachable moments, little opportunities to ensure that people are given some degree of information on this, so that they are better able to prepare themselves. Even in the clinic, you go to clinic as a pregnant woman, and I don't know how very many other systems are set up, but we don't have any mandatory anything that allows you to have any form of education on child raising, on any of those sorts of things. So I think that we need to find these little pockets and fill them with as much information as we would like, to get out there on gender-based violence, and of course a number of other social issues. Because during this pandemic, it may be a little off course, but I think that mental health has become a big thing. And I remember someone asked the question about if abusers are born or are they made, and I remember initially my thing is they had to be made because behavior is something that is learned. And so, but when I thought about it now at this stage in my life, I realized that this is something that can be argued, because we have lots of people who, though it should not be used as an excuse, have mental health issues, which is, it doesn't necessarily come back to something that they would have learned. So, I just feel like, we're dealing with a lot as a people. And for those of us who are stronger, we have to try to find little opportunities to ensure that we can make the difference in at least the life of one person. You don't have to try to change the whole world. That's a big task, but let us all take responsibility or for helping or ensuring that some degree of education, some degree of support is given to at least one other person
in your little corner. And Ambassador, you have certainly established that wealth and class, and our friends from Guyana have established that race has nothing to do with the home in which violence may take place. How do we mitigate?
Well, thank you very much for saying that, because in my experience, I can tell you that a lot of the people who I speak to who have suffered from domestic violence are from a certain class. And so I know that we need to eradicate poverty, but that is not the reason why we have domestic violence. I wanted to make a suggestion about the need to have parenting workshops. We need to have parenting workshops. We need to work with teachers, because, just before I came on, I saw a particular post on social media where somebody spoke about their own experience of being a bad girl in high school. And it caused me to look back on my time in high school of being a monitor and deputy head girl and all of those things, and look and recalling all the, because at that time of my life I was in all girls school. Look at all those girls who were exhibiting antisocial behavior. Nobody, at least as far as I know, and from getting to know them more after leaving school, you realize that they were dealing with some serious issues at home. And I believe not because the teachers were not caring, but they really didn't have the skills or the resources to help those girls. In fact, when I went to school, I don't think we had guidance counselors. I know they now have guidance counselors. And I also have friends who are guidance counselors, and I know that they go and visit homes. So we need to provide the kind of support in schools. We need to provide the kind of support in communities. Those communities that do not have police and a court and so on. You know, we need to teach, and I'm a firm believer in mediation. We need to teach mediation skills, alternative dispute resolution, so that our people will understand that, yes, you are going to have problems. As my mother used to say, tongue and teeth will meet. But it doesn't mean that you have to resort to violence in order to satisfy the need to exert yourself. And it's very important to me that we provide, as a community, that we provide support for families. We provide support for children who are living in these families where they get up every morning and they see their parents fighting, or they get up every morning and they're beaten. You know, it's something that we take for a joke. I've seen something that suggests that, you know, how did you get beaten when you were younger? And we take it for a joke, you know, what is the expression on your face and how you use your hands? And until we do that, then there are always going to be people who feel that the way that I exert my power over somebody else is through violence. And that is what we need to deal with in all of our countries, because we've never talked about this among each other until here today. And it turns out that all of us are having the same kinds of experiences in our countries. So it's important, because we lose, the amount of women who are killed, the amount of children now that we see happening to. We can't go on like this, and we have to do something.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Thank you, Tyrone. Thank you, Odessa. Thank you, Vanda. Thank you, Anselm. You have all brought a wealth of experience and a wealth of knowledge to this discussion. This is what I try to do as someone in the media, provide a forum where we can continue to speak about these issues. United Nations, UN Women calls it the shadow pandemic. And it is something that is within our lives, our societies, that we're afraid to deal with. But we must deal with it. And I certainly hope all of us here certainly will work towards having more interventions, more solutions. Certainly some solutions have been put forward today. And we would like to have the state and social services and corporate services that are needed to put some of these ideas into action so that we can help our women, our children, all of those who are living with violence, help them to find a way out. That's our program, folks, and we thank you for staying with us and look forward to having you share in these moments again the next time when another edition of Time to Face the Facts is aired. I'm your host, Beverly Sinclair, saying so long for now.